So, welcome, we're live, and this is the third in the instalment of Grand Designs live from home. Thank you for joining, and I hope Stephen's off first. And yeah, we've got lots of people joining us, so thanks for joining us today. This is just a little bit of housekeeping because we're going to start in about a minute and a half. And today we're going to be talking about zero carbon homes. So in a week where we celebrated Earth Day, I think that is probably a very good topic for us to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about that, but I've got two very special guests with us today for this live broadcast, and I'm going to be talking to Jerry Tate from Tate Harmer, and those of you who are fans of the show will know of Jerry from when he was from his house called the Who House, which was broadcast, and I think it was about 2010, so just about 10 years ago now, and it was a great house, fantastic. So he's going to be on the show, and also we're going to be joined by Evan MacDonald, who is a property developer, owner of a company called Melt, and he is passionate about sustainable homes. So we're going to start. So as it is 20 past 8, I think I'm gonna start now. So this is great. So thank you all for joining us. So just a few points really. If you can, if you've got any questions, so we're going to be taking questions. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk to one of our guests first, and towards the end of that chat, I'll be asking you guys to send your questions our way. And if you could just use, it's nice to see all the comments coming through, but if you could just use that little square with a question mark in it, which is just to the right of the comment section. If you can use that, what happens is all those questions go into one place, and I can call on them when it's time to do our Q&A. So we'll do a Q&A with our first guest, then we'll go on to our second guest talking about sustainable homes, and then we will do another Q&A with them. So thank you all for joining us. I'm glad you're here actually, because this is a topic which I think is very, very close to my heart, and is also very close to the hearts of all of us at Grand Designs, because obviously home building is one of the biggest polluters out there. You know, it is a, as we all know, anybody who's done it or even done an extension, it's a messy business. There is waste. There's a lot of embodied carbon in the materials we use, and that means that there is a lot of, it's about the carbon or the energy that it takes to make a piece of plasterboard, concrete in particular, which is particularly high, has a very high carbon footprint. Bricks, even solar panels. Now think about that. So even a solar panel, which is obviously a renewable way of generating energy, but there is a carbon cost to making that panel, even though it goes on to generate lots of lovely heat, so of electricity. Sorry. So that's one of the things you've got to think about. So it's not a simple topic, but it's one that is, as I said, very close to our hearts. So I'm just waiting for Jerry Tate, our first guest, to join the conversation. As soon as we can, I'll get him in. But for those of you out there, the idea of this talk really is for us to show you, whether you're a self-builder, whether you're a grand designer, or whether you are just doing an extension into your home. What we're trying to do is just give you some pointers. And the first part of the talk is going to be about design, looking at the design. Yeah. So, for example, what is it about design that can make a self-build, make a grand design sustainable? Can you design it in? Is it possible to design it in? Is it possible to design something that is sustainable but looks good? Or is sustainable homes kind of like shoes that are good for your feet, very comfortable, but they don't look great? I don't think that's the case, and I think we're here today to try and talk to you about that. I think what I'll do is, just because I think Jerry might be having a few problems, I will swap this around, and what I'll probably do is call in Evan to start off proceedings. I'll just ask Evan to join us. So yeah, again, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got any questions for Evan, please could you just, oh, there he is. Evan, can you hear me?
Hey, Lee, how are you?
Very good, Evan, thank you. Thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Really good. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So for those of our viewers who don't know you, do you want to give us a quick intro?
Yeah, so my name's Evan Maindonald. I'm the founder and CEO of Melt Property. So that's a property development and investment company. It was formed in 2002, and in the last 18 years, we've built over 100 properties in London, Gloucestershire and Kent. And over that time, we've learned how to make our developments more environmentally friendly. And it's becoming more and more important. It's quite complicated to deliver environmentally friendly or sustainable properties and actually make that economically viable. And actually developing the understanding of both the technology and the economics of delivering that technology has taken us quite a long time. But we're doing that on a scheme that we're developing in Gloucester at the moment, a 19-unit scheme. And we've got a big mixed-use development coming up in Kennington in SW9.
Yeah.
And we're really going to go the whole hog on that one in terms of sustainability. So it's exciting technology, but it's also something that can help you get a planning application through because the councils are very keen on it. So it's important for us to do it, but it's critical that we work out how to do it in a way that's economically viable. So it can be, it's affordable. And that really, I think, is where it's fallen down in the past.
Yeah.
It's not been affordable.
And that's been part of the problem, hasn't it? Because it's seen as not only a cost that you probably don't want to it's been a big cost up until now, hasn't it? To make things zero carbon, to make things sustainable.
I think that's the problem. And I think that's why house builders have avoided it. But actually, if you do it the right way, it isn't expensive because there are grants that can be used.
Yeah.
But you have to set things up in the right way. And it's very difficult. You need to understand the financial structuring. You need to understand the technologies that you're going to use. You need to understand how those technologies work together. And so I guess from our point of view, the kind of holy grail of sustainability is a combination of ground source heating, solar panels and batteries. And we can talk about, if you like, at some point, the way in which those three work together to deliver a sustainable solution. And I think the economics of it is pretty interesting as well. But you can design the stuff so that it is, it can in some instances be less expensive than traditional forms of heating and generation of hot water. But it's certainly possible to design it so that it's equivalent or not a lot more in terms of cost. And actually, the fact is that homeowners won't pay more for a house, or they won't pay a lot more for a house, if it has those green technologies in them. They might pay a little bit more, but they will generally look at the running costs of the house. And so what you have to do is deliver something that's cost effective from a running cost point of view, but you also have to actually pay for the cost of the stuff that you install. Yeah, and so for people who are self-building, what should they be looking at in terms? I mean, you mentioned some grants earlier, and just a little bit of housekeeping. There's some really lovely questions coming through on the comments feed, but if you can use the little square with a question mark in it, which is just to the right of the comment box, if you can put your questions for Evan there, then when we do the Q&A in a few minutes, we'll go through them. But one of the questions was you mentioned grants. Now, what type of grants are there available to people who are self-building? Okay, so the main one for people who are self-building is called the domestic RHI, Renewable Heating Incentive. So there are two types of renewable heating incentive. If you Google renewable heating incentive, you'll see lots of details on the scheme come up. It's sometimes abbreviated to RHI. And those, and there's a commercial version of the RHI as well. And so what you need to do to qualify for the domestic RHI is different to what you need to do to qualify for the commercial one. So developers have to structure it differently to individual homeowners. So, but for self-builders, it's the domestic RHI you want to look at. And in essence, those are grants that give you income from the government over a period of time in return for installing certain types of technology that are environmentally friendly. So things like solar panels, ground source heating, I think battery technology qualifies. I don't know, because battery technology is something that's newer on the scene.
Okay.
Things like biomass heating, and a generation of energy using wind. So there's a bunch of stuff that qualifies. It's all on the government's website. Go and have a look at that. If that is something that you want to figure out how to do for your self-build.
And how do you get that money? I mean, do you get that money up front? Because one of the issues with sustainable technology is the capital outlay at the beginning, i.e. the money you have to spend to buy the stuff at the beginning. So how do the grants work? Do some of them work? Do they give you money up front, or is it in the case of a sense of rebates where you get money, once a year or something?
Somebody just said they're not interested in grants, but we're going to keep talking about them anyway.
Yeah.
So in essence, you do have to cover the capital cost up front, and you can claim that money back. You have to claim that money back over a period of time. But I guess the way to look at it is that if your heating and electricity costs are cheaper because you install these technologies, your house is going to cost less to run. And so I guess the way to look at it is that if you can put a mortgage on the house, and you can maybe get a bit more on your mortgage, you can cover the cost of installing those things, and then you end up getting the money back over time. As developers, we have a few other options open to us, and so the way it works with a commercial RHI is that you actually have to install shared infrastructure. So, for example, in our development in Gloucester, we've got a shared borehole infrastructure that the houses use. So you can't install it for a single house, because if it's for a single property, that's the domestic RHI. And what we can do, because we've got a certain amount of that stuff, is we can you can only heat, but with a ground source heating system, if you set it up right, you can heat in winter and you can cool in summer. So the way that you'd have to deliver the cooling is you put a panel in that the ground source heating cools down, and you blow air over the panel. And so you can have, the point is you can run the system in reverse and you can get air conditioning. And you can also, what's really interesting about this stuff is you can trade off different zones of a property. So let's say you've got a swimming pool and a wine cellar. What you can do is you can heat your swimming pool in summer, and you can cool the house at the same time. You just trade off the heat between the two. So the system trades the two between one another. And if you've got a wine cellar, you can also cool your wine cellar and use that to heat the pool as well.
So what you're actually saying is that this, there's lots of technology out there that is actually now available to self-builders, but not only that they can get assistance, if not to pay for it at the beginning, but to get to get grants towards the end of it,
Well, exactly, to get grants towards the running cost, so it'll lower the running cost of the property. And I think another thing that's just worth saying is that when a lot of this technology first came on the market, it was very expensive. And so, the grants that were available then were a lot larger than they are now. But that's because many governments, and in particular the German government, realized that actually for this technology to come down to a price where it was reasonable enough that everyone could afford to install it, there would need to be some economies of scale in production. And so those grants were designed to get to the thing where those economies of scale existed. And so now we actually have things like solar panels, which are much more cost effective than they used to be 10 years ago. Ground source heating is much more widely adopted. People understand it better. So a lot of the challenge with this stuff is finding, for example, a plumber who can install a ground source heating system. A lot of plumbers you go to, you say ground source heating, and they're like, well, I've heard of it, but I don't know how to install it.
So that, I must just admit, that's one of those things that I think lots of people have heard of, but maybe don't quite understand it. And I've actually, because so just so everybody knows, I actually work with Evan on some of these projects, and we'll be doing we're doing ground source heating. We are doing it in the project in Gloucester, and I've just got a quick image here. And that kind of that's what they call the vertical borehole array rather than the horizontal array. But that's effectively, and that's actually that's the show home, isn't it, Evan? Actually, that's plot one.
Yeah, that's the show home. So there's two ways you can do that. One is the one that's shown there, where you've got a borehole, and actually, so on that development, the deepest borehole I think is 167 meters. So that's 550 feet. It's pretty damn deep. The other way to do this is using something called slinkies, or that slinkies is kind of the slang name for them, but it's a ground array. So you just take off the first couple of meters of ground, and then you run that sort of in a flat manner around the house. The boreholes are much more efficient because you're going much deeper, and so you can get down to a part of the earth where the temperature is much more is much more consistent. Just a comment on air source heating. There may be some different arguments about this, but actually, if you look at the coefficient of conversion of energy, particularly in winter, air source heating is not more efficient than ground source heating. It is easier to install, particularly to retrofit. But ground source heating ultimately is a better solution if it's installed properly.
I mean, that's a good point, because one of the things about ground source heating is you need quite a lot of land sometimes to do it, and it's not always there's the equipment to go in to if you're going to do it vertically, and if you're going to do it horizontally where it lies flat, then you need quite a lot of land. That's not applicable for everybody, for lots of different reasons.
Well, no, so that's the point. With ground source, you have to do boreholes. And so if you've got an existing building, it's probably pretty difficult to put a borehole in there. So if you've got a bit of land outside, then you're okay. But you've got to get a drilling rig on there, and you can imagine that a drilling rig for a 160 meter borehole is going to be quite a big rig. So but if you are building in London, and you're demolishing something and starting from scratch, there's no reason, and we're doing this on our Kennington development, or it's part of the technology we're going to install, there's no reason that you can't put boreholes in under the foundation, or if you're piling the foundation, for those who don't know what a pile is, it's basically just a big hole in the ground filled with concrete and steel that acts as a sort of a pole in the ground to put the foundation on. You can actually put geothermal heating into piles. I've seen that done in buildings. It's quite expensive.
That's fantastic, Evan. So look,
but you don't necessarily need area. But because you can go down, And obviously, this is another picture of Line Grove. But here is Kennington, which you mentioned earlier. This is the site where, I mean, we were talking about this today, weren't we? We had a long conversation about. Listen, somebody just said Earth energy banks. That's a really insightful comment. Because what you do with ground source, particularly if you run it to cool in the summer and heat in the winter, is you use the earth as a big heat store or cool store. So what you do is you cool the earth down in the winter, and you warm it up in the summer. So it's like a big store of heat. And so that was a really insightful comment, actually, by whoever said that. Sorry. Well, looking at the comments as they pop up on my screen.
As you know, at Grand Designs Live, we've got some very, very clever people who come onto the show. I mean, that's fantastic. What is, because we're almost running out of time, actually, so I'm going to start the Q&A in a minute, but what is the holy grail in terms of sustainable technology if you were self-building a house? What would you say, look, you should definitely employ these 3 or 4 types of technology? What would you say?
So for me, and everyone has a different opinion on this because this stuff is still developing, but for me, the holy grail of sustainability is a combination of solar panels, batteries, and ground source heating. And the reason I say that is that ground source heating is electrically powered. So what you can achieve if you get it right, if you put ground source heating in, that will provide your heating and your hot water. The solar panels will provide the electricity to drive the ground source heating system, so you don't need to take any electricity off the grid if you can get enough capacity in there in terms of solar panels. Sometimes they're called PV, that stands for photovoltaic panels. basically just means solar panels that provide electricity. What you do in order to get your electricity at night is you put a battery in the house. And so during the day, the battery charges up, and then during the night, that provides the electricity for the house, and then obviously next day fills up with electricity again. If you've got an electric car, it's possible to actually plug the electric car into the system and use the electric car as a store of energy. The batteries in the electric car as a store of energy, and also charge the electric car using the PV on the roof. So for me, and sorry, just to kind of add to that, what I think really makes the thing work well is if you install a ground source heating system which heats in winter, but also contains a ducting system with panels in it that you can blow air over, so you can cool in summer. You combine that with a couple of other things. One would be mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. So any excess heat in the house can get moved around or recycled or turned into energy if necessary. And also the other thing is something else that I've forgotten. I can't quite remember why, but that combination of stuff gives you a really well stuck together solution that's very energy efficient.
I mean, look, I think that's great advice. You know, effectively look at how you're generating your heat in effect. So ground source heating. If you can't do that, air source heating, then you need the right kind of heating system, don't you? Because those sort of ways of generating heat work best on low volume systems like underfloor heating and things like that.
So this is the key thing. If you're installing ground source heating, you need underfloor heating because it runs at a lower temperature and it runs much more efficiently at a lower temperature. And so you need a really large space, panel effectively. So you use your floors as a heating panel. But it isn't critical that you have that all the way through the house. And on a timber frame house, for example, it can be quite difficult to put underfloor heating on the upper floors because timber floors and underfloor heating and tiling and that sort of thing don't really work that well together. So what we're doing on our development in Gloucester Lime Grove is underfloor heating on the ground floor, which is a concrete slab. And then on the upper floors, we've got extra large radiators. The radiators are about maybe twice the size of normal radiators, but they don't look out of place. We put some nice radiators in. We put tall vertical ones. We took, the tall vertical radiators in. And so, it isn't critical that you have underfloor heating, but it does work a lot better with underfloor heating. So the other thing I was going to say earlier is solar panels work better when they're cooler. And so the other thing that you can do with solar panels is you can run hot water over them to cool them down. It makes them work more efficiently. They generate more electricity, and you use the hot water that you generate for the hot water supply for the house. So that's quite exciting too, as a way to kind of make the system work even better.
Fantastic. And of course, depending on the system you've installed, the size of your house, the insulation properties of your house, you may need to top up the heat at some point. So if you do have solar, then that's what you can use for that. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, if you have got batteries, then they're a bit of a game changer, aren't they? Because that means you can store that electricity, and then effectively it would mean that you can have a heating system that is completely off grid.
Yeah, that is, so batteries are the real game changer. And so this battery technology has not really been available for domestic properties until very recently. So Tesla really led the way with their battery solution that they kind of sell to people with a car and the solar panels on the roof. So they've got these roof tiles that are actually solar panels, and that's another interesting thing you can do rather than actually putting a roof on and then putting panels on the roof. You can get tiles, roofing tiles that are solar panels, and so you save the cost of the roofing tiles. That technology is still coming down in price, but it's a really interesting way to, if you're starting from scratch, to bring costs down.
Well, great. I think we're going to start the Q&A in a minute, Evan, or right now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got some great questions in. So if you've got any questions for Evan, who is a developer, he hasn't just developed big buildings, he's developed smaller ones as well. He's been doing it for almost 20 years now, so he's got a lot of experience. So if you've got any questions for him, use the little square box with a question mark to the right-hand side of the comment box. And there's a question here I'm looking at. I'll answer it very quickly because Jerry was meant to be on first. But yes, Jerry is joining us. He's waiting in the wings and he'll be joining us in about 5 to 10 minutes. So Evan, we got the first question here actually, which is it the end for the brick and block building method for house building? Which is an interesting one actually, because, well, because I know more than others, but you know, some of the developments we're working on, we're not, you know, doing that much brick and block work, are we, at the moment?
No. So, but my view on brick and block is it works better for one-off dwellings.
Yeah.
I prefer houses that are built out of block. Doesn't really matter what the cladding is. You know, the brickwork on the outside is essentially a form of cladding. But I prefer houses that are built from block to houses that are built from timber frame, because they're just more solid.
Okay.
And you know, concrete floors are better for installation of things like underfloor heating.
Okay.
So if you ask me, would I prefer a block house to a timber frame house? I'd prefer a block house all day. Okay. But when you're building multiple plots, timber frame is much more cost effective. And so as a developer, really, you don't have a lot of choice. You could be talking about an additional cost of 10 or 20% for brick and block over timber frame. And so I would rather, in most cases, I would rather put that into the specification for the houses than the actual frame of the house itself. You know, in terms of energy efficiency, timber can work better, and it is more sustainable. But you know, we're building 2 developments at the moment. One of them is a block of flats with a couple of commercial units in it. That we're doing in block. It's block and render.
Yeah.
And we're doing it because for a one-off development like that, or for a one-off building like that, it's just more cost effective to build in block. So I think it depends on what you're building, but for one-off properties, brick and block may be more cost effective. So I don't think it's the end by any means, but I think, you know, generally things are moving in the direction of timber frame.
And I think the moral of that story is, you know, the materials you use to build your home, how you build it, you know, all depend on the circumstances of your budget, where you are, how you want to build it, and what your goals are at the end of it. So I've got to move on to a question now about air source heating. Yeah. So someone's asked, what about air source heating with MVHR?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the point about that is that air source heating and MVHR can work quite well together. Yeah. Because of the heat recovery element. So, you know, a loft tends to be quite a hot place when it's sunny, because, you know, the sun beats down on the roof. And so you can take that heat out of the roof. So MVHR, for anyone that doesn't know, is mechanical ventilation heat recovery. And in essence, mechanical ventilation is blowing air around a house. So what you can do is you can recover the air from the hot bits of the house and put it in the cooler bits. And that will reduce the load on an air source heat pump, because I think, particularly in winter, that's quite important, because the coefficient of efficiency of an air source heat pumps struggle when it gets cold outside, and that's the difficulty with them, and that's why you know, for somewhere like the UK, ground source heating, if you look at it on a year-round basis, is probably a better option. Okay,
and then another question on air source heating, and what your thoughts on air source heating with underfloor hot water. I mean, my view on this is, again, it just depends. It will depend on the makeup and the thermal characteristics of your building, how well it.
Well, I differ from you there, Conley. I would say air source heating is not the right solution if you're going to go put in underfloor heating and to run your hot water. Ground source will work much better. Yeah. The advantage of air source is that because it's air, you're blowing hot air into your house, and you've also got you can run it in reverse, and you've got a cooling system in summer. Yeah. So I like it from that perspective. Or if you've got something like a wine cellar where you're cooling one area and you can use that to heat another, then that works. But I think if you're going to put underfloor heating in, I would say ground source heating all day.
Yeah. Questions about batteries, actually, about the sustainability of the battery themselves. Don't need to sound thick, but what happens to those batteries in the future, not environmentally?
Yeah, you know, this is a really good question, and it kind of ties in with another theme about sustainability, because, you know, everyone is thinking about what are the carbon emissions of this structure, without necessarily thinking about what it costs to actually build the in terms of carbon emissions, to actually build the structure.
Yeah.
And so, if you really want to look at it from all the way through, you have to look at what the carbon emissions involved in actually manufacturing the batteries are as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. When the batteries reach the end of their life, is that environmentally sustainable? Because they've got to go somewhere. And the answer, I think, to some extent, depends on the battery technology. Battery technology is developing all the time, and so some batteries are being developed that are potentially able to be recycled.
Yeah, yeah.
But it really does come down to who's making it and how it's made.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting debates about Tesla with their electric cars has been the question of how much carbon is produced in making a Tesla car and producing those batteries. And there are some petrol cars that, if you look at them over their life, produce less carbon than a Tesla does, because if you take into account the carbon that's produced in the manufacturing process. So I think you have to look at these things in the round, and that's coming more and more to the fore with sustainability on construction.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things on that point, I think, are that I've read that people at Aston Martin, some other car companies, are actually looking at ways to reuse the batteries after they reach their usefulness, or the discharge rate in a car has gone down to a point where it's not good enough for a car, but it'd still be great for home storage. And they're looking at ways that the batteries from cars, will then be used as home store batteries, which is, I think, very interesting. But Evan, thank you so much, because I'm going to have to just switch over to Jonah. Evan, thanks for joining us. Great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here, Colin. Appreciate it.
That was absolutely fascinating, actually, I think. And I think what's really interesting for me is to think that over the years, how it's changed in terms of what's available to self-builders to make sustainable houses. One of the interesting things that Kevin's always said on the show is that not only are self-built homes normally better designed and more beautiful, they're always as well can be a lot of the time more sustainable, which I think is fantastic. So I think it's really great that all these technologies are coming through. And of course, if you have any questions, you can send us a direct message or contact me or Evan, and we will, of course, help you out if we can. So I'm just waiting for Jerry to join us from Tate Harmer, and hopefully he'll be joining us in a moment. Jerry, hello.
Hello. Hi, Kinley. You're right.
You?
Amazing. Great.
Yeah. Lovely to see you again. I mean, we seem to be meeting like this a lot, don't we? About 3 or 4.
It's virtual meeting at the moment. It's sort of,
yeah.
You can't give people a hug and buy them a drink or anything at the moment.
No.
Not right.
So, Jerry, for those few who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro into what you do and who you are?
Yeah, sure. So, well, my name's Jerry Tate, and with my partner Rory, we run an architecture practice called Tate Harmer. And I mean, we do lots of things, actually. We do kind of hotels, and we do education buildings. We do a lot of houses, multiple units, and also lovely one-off houses for people. But what we tend to always do is low energy timber framed buildings, quite often in landscape settings, but our specialism really is in sustainable, low carbon buildings in truth.
Yeah. So I've got a picture up. I don't know if you can see that, Jerry. That is you should recognise that, I hope.
First project, actually. That was Who House, and it was on Grand Designs, which was that was great. That was quite a roller coaster. That was a fun project, but
sorry, that was your first project, was it?
That was our very first project. Yeah, no, that was literally straight out the gate. That was what we did, and it was for Nat and Lucy, and Nat was actually, I have to say, a really, really amazing guy who very sadly, but he was very clever, actually. He was a very, very clever IT guy who did a lot of things for people like the New Economics Foundation, and he wanted to build a home that was really low energy, but his exact brief was, it's got to be really low energy, not so weird that people think about it, and it can't cost me more than it should cost, if you see what I mean. It's got to cost. So he's trying to prove a point, really, when we built this, and he very tragically died before.
Yeah, it was a very sad episode, actually. That was and I mean, you know, on that note, you know, as an architect, do you think you can design in? Is it possible to design in sustainability into a building?
Yeah, I think it is actually, and I think it's really fascinating, you know, listening to Evan actually, because I mean, Evan's really good at two things. Like, he's fantastic at design, like he gets design,
Yeah,
and he gets the systems as well.
yeah,
And those two are really important. But the truth is, the design of the building is something that's going to last longer than the systems. So, you know, the design life of a building really in technical terms is about 60 years. I mean, obviously they can last for hundreds of years, whereas
yeah, yeah,
and really after 15 years is out of date. I mean, look at all the gas boilers that we're going to have to change over the next few years.
yeah, yeah.
So actually, I think in terms of designing in sustainability, a lot of that is about making a very energy efficient building, basically making, you know, something that's super insulated, that's triple glazed, but also lets nice daylight in. So you've got good and even daylighting, and that's orientated correctly. So, you know,
Yeah.
it gets good kind of winter sun, but in the summer it's shaded, you know. So it's all those kind of basic design moves that can really make a building efficient before you get into precisely what renewable systems you're going to be putting in there.
Yeah. And that's really important, isn't it? And it's really important to have an architect that understands that from day one, because what you're talking about, the issues with solar gain, they can be manipulated to a certain extent through design, through orientation, placement of windows. So I guess what you're saying is, you know, one of the things that a self-builder should look at is what I guess you guys call a fabric first approach.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, so for people who don't know, fabric first really, as a term, came from passive house. So when you hear passive house is bandied around quite a lot as a term. And there was a Sterling Prize winning scheme by Mikhail Riches that won the Sterling this year that was passive house. And what passive house was actually invented by a German physicist called Wolfgang Feist. And so what he wanted to do was make very efficient buildings. So he only really cared about one thing, and that was making the building itself extremely energy efficient. So efficient, in fact, that technically it doesn't need a heat. And actually, what passive house is it's basically a very, very long Excel spreadsheet, really, actually. It's a trick to it. But when you use it, it makes you design an efficient building, essentially. So it makes you orientate the building in the right way.
Yeah.
It makes glazing on the right facades to get the right amount of energy. Actually, so that's Kintyre, which
and that's passive, isn't it, Jerry? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that's actually my partner Rory, but we finished that a few months ago now, and that's won RBA awards and sustainability awards and stuff. So that is a passive house actually in Hertfordshire. So that hasn't got a heating system at all, in fact. So what is that? People, the sun, and the dog, basically, and it does that because the windows are basically in the right place. It's a very light, very efficient construction. And then somebody earlier on mentioned a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system. It does have one of those. So what that does is it's the thing that Evan was describing. It means you can have fresh air brought into the house in the winter months, but you don't lose the heat through the windows. And in the summer, you just open the windows and it works.
Okay. So just, I mean, that sounds, for those, you know, who aren't, you know, obviously I've seen passive house, been in them, I get it, but that sounds odd. There's no heating in this. And this is, if I'm not mistaken, is this the interior of?
This is the inside. Yeah.
So it's beautiful, by the way. It looks incredibly well designed. It looks like it's got lots of glazing in it. So there's no heating. So how is it heated?
Yeah, well, so it is just heated by the sun, the people, and the dog, basically. So if you like, each one of us is the equivalent of a bar on an electric fire. Yeah. And then there is solar gain that comes through the windows. So you can see there's lots of light streaming in there. But what that actually means is you're getting the solar gain coming in, and then you're not losing that because you've got a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system, and you've got quite an airtight building, basically. Okay. So essentially, the sun and the people, that is what is doing it. Now, I would say, I don't think passive houses are for everybody. You know, I think you've got to be into it to build it that way. And I say that because we've built probably about 25 one-off houses for people so far. And we've done about 3 or 4 passive houses. We've talked about it with everyone we've done. But actually, what I'd say is there's a difference between a certified passive house that doesn't have a heating system,
yeah,
or using passive house principles to make a very efficient building,
yeah,
that's not quite the same thing. And I think if you have a very efficient building, then it starts to make a lot of sense. You know, things like, you know, ground source and air source heat pumps that Evan about, PV panels, those kind of things. But really, you can have sort of you don't have to have a giant primary heat source because it's less of a problem.
okay, yeah.
Basically.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start our Q&A in about 5 minutes. So please, if you've got any questions, I can see some questions coming up in the stream, but they kind of, they disappear. So if I'm not quick enough, I've forgotten what they are. So if you can just use that little square with the question mark in it, which is to the right-hand side of your comment button, then they don't disappear, and I can get back to the question. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Jerry Tate with us, and he is, you know, one of the country's foremost experts on passive housing. So if anybody there wants to know anything about how they can provide or they can deliver a passive house, then please, you know, ask a question. This is the best opportunity. So look, Jerry, so from what you're saying is, you know, start with the fabric of the building, make sure you've got a really well-insulated building with glazing that's well-insulated, that pointing in the right direction, that's well-sealed, yeah? What's the next thing that people should be looking at?
Yeah, so one thing, and actually, I'm just going to say on that, though, what's interesting, because I know we had this conversation, Kunle, is that is the right answer if it's for you, kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
Story about we had another client who runs a woodland basically, and I knew he was never going to shut the doors, right? There was no point talking to him about an airtight building, so he made a really heavy building that he could heat with logs basically, because that was what he wanted to do. So but essentially, yeah, it's like tailoring the fabric to suit the person. Once you've got there, you then start choosing your renewables. So you know, you look to go for the most efficient renewable system given your choices on the building fabric. And actually, on that, I think the thing that Evan's talking about is really interesting, that the world really is going electric. So that's something to bear in mind. And so are the cars. So both the houses and the cars are going electric. And there's a real chance now to have some synergy between the two, which I think is really exciting, actually, in terms of things like battery storage, in terms of things like, you know, efficiencies between your car and your house. Yeah, great, especially combined with things like photovoltaic panels, which are essentially an offset, really.
Yeah. What interested me about what you said about the project you did, where you didn't advise the client go for a passive house because, you know, the way he lives, you just knew, you know, and behaviour is so important, isn't it? You know, you have to change your behaviour. But one of the issues, I don't know if it's an issue, but one of the things with passive house is that it's quite a high bar, isn't it, to achieve, or it can be anyway, especially retrofit. But, you know, even if you're not going to achieve passive, is your opinion that it is the best thing to do is try and get as close to that as you possibly can within the constraints of your budget and your, your building materials or wherever you are?
Yeah, I honestly think it is. I think you can stick to passive house standards for your building fabric, but not actually get certification, which you're right is a high bar. And the high bar actually comes down to things like air tightness. So the measure of air tightness, for example, on building regs, it's a very strange unit of measure, something pascals per blah, 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 but it's 12 on building regs. And for a passive house, it's got something like 0.8. So, you know, it's extremely difficult to achieve that level of air tightness. But so that picture there, that's Greenacres in Essex that we finished for Matt and Belinda. And that is an example of a building that's not passive house certified, but the fabric is passive house standard, so that actually there's very little heating system needed. So even though we didn't reach passive house certification on that, we weren't aiming for it. It's an extremely efficient building. And you can see that actually it's quite a charming building. So it's one of the things I like about one-off houses is that they look a little bit like their owners, and they've got a bit of their personality in them.
So, so what does Belinda, what reminds you of Belinda in that photo? What does she look like in that photo? Does she look like
the lamp? There's this sort of quite interesting lamp in the middle there.
So, but on that note of heating, though, so is that the only heating source there? That log burner? Is that?
No, that has an air source heat pump. That's got solar thermal air source heat pump as well. It's got underfloor heating, basically. So it's quite similar to what everyone's talking about. It's also got an MVHR system. That's very good. Yeah. So, and what's interesting about combining solar thermal and air source heat pump, I can see there's some questions coming through about air source. What's interesting about that is because solar thermal can basically run your hot water during the summer months, so it stops the air source heat pump kicking in the summer months, and that can a lot out of your electricity bill, because the bit that's really expensive with the heat pump is when it starts. Basically, and it uses a lot of electricity. So if you put solar thermal in, basically you cut your electricity bill down loads.
So Joe, look, I've got loads of really interesting questions coming in, so I'm going to jump to the Q&A, but I just wanted to say that this is Belinda's house, isn't it? This is the interior of it,
Well, yeah.
And, you know, when I look at this, you know, it's high, it's got, you know, double height ceilings, lots of glazing, it's beautiful inside, but you were still able to achieve that the goal of having something. I mean, is this carbon neutral, this home, would you say? Or
Well, yes, it is. Yes, although it's not passive house, basically.
It's not passive house, yeah.
It's carbon neutral on a SAP calculation basis. So, and the reason that I'm ignoring is if you're into passive house, you know that the SAP calculation, which is the standard government measure, isn't actually very good necessarily, but you know, this does meet that. This does meet that standard. But I think the point you're making, though, is really, really important, and it's something that as a company we're really passionate about. What we there's a temptation to say, you know, it's very sustainable and energy efficient, and therefore it's not such a good building. Actually, that does sometimes happen, you know. But I honestly think the point about it, really, you know, you should be able to do a really great building that's really energy efficient, you know, and it doesn't cost that much more money. I mean, if you could do all those three things, you're there, aren't you? It's fantastic.
Yeah. And that's a good point, actually. So, you know, if you wanted to, let's take passive as an example. What do you think the build cost uplift percentage-wise would be if you were, you know, between doing a traditional, you know, sticking to what building control say you have to do to going for it and going for passive?
Yeah, no. So I know the answer to this, and it's between 15 to 20%, depending on exactly, you know, where the building is and what the orientation is and all those kind of. And if you then pay back, it's a 15 to 20-year payback on that basis.
Okay. Yeah.
No, it's actually if energy costs went up, obviously that payback would be quicker. But one of the slight funny things at the moment, there are big incentives, like things like RHI and to renewable systems, but there's very few incentives in terms of sort of government tariffs to do energy efficiency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I think actually that's something that could be, you know, something the government could think about, is actually using a grant system or a tariff system for improving efficiencies.
No, because those are the sort of those marginal gains that if we all do, that will make a big difference overall, won't it? On to our first question, actually, quite an interesting one. So zero carbon housing is possible, but is it scalable to larger size projects? And that brings me actually to what you talked about earlier. Goldsmith Street, you mentioned that earlier. I mean, you know, they managed to do it there and that was an affordable scheme, wasn't it? So is it possible on larger schemes?
Yes, it is actually, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think in some ways it can be easier on larger schemes, but it can be more difficult to square. So if I sort of explain that, you know, we do larger schemes, right? So we're doing some very, very sustainable larger schemes at the moment that are going to come through over the next few years. So, for example, we're doing a fantastic thing up in Esholt with Yorkshire Water, which for them project of the kind of zero carbon technologies that they want to bring forwards. Now, you know, what's great at scale is you can start having things like district heating systems. You can start having kind of buying in bulk systems. There's a lot of sort of efficiency you can build in.
So, Jerry, do you want to just explain what a district heating system is for those who don't know?
Yeah, sure. So, because it's something that actually in Europe is quite common, and in Britain we do less of, but. In Holland, for example, most kind of new housing developments, a block of 50 houses would have effectively one central boiler, if you like. So, and that is what is supplying all of the heat for the whole and houses. So, actually, in someone like Almere, for example, Almere is pretty much in Holland. The whole city is heated as a byproduct of a power station, like just next door to Amsterdam.
Fantastic.
Yeah, which is fantastic, right? So it's very, very efficient. You're tied into buying your energy from that one supplier, but you know, in terms of the production of that energy, it's really efficient. So, but the trouble at larger scale is you start getting into quite severe economics, right? Because if you're a developer, like Evan's a really good developer, and he's doing it partly because he's really passionate about it, as well as the finances.
Well, you need desire, don't you? You need a desire to
yeah.
to achieve this, and that's, I think, that's probably why more passive stuff is done by self-builders or people building their own homes, because they have that desire.
You've got to be into it, you know. But I think that is coming though. But at the moment, if you built a lot of really sustainable houses, there's a question about whether you could basically charge more money for them than you could for houses sustainable, because that's the long and the short of it, you know. And I think actually that is coming in the same way as people pay much more attention to kind of cars they're buying, the energy efficiency. I think we'll find that, you know, in the housing market, very, very quickly, people are going to really start paying attention to how house is going to use.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got 5 minutes left, so if you've got any questions, please use that little square to the right-hand side of your comment box to give you the question. There's lots of things coming. Someone's just said, very insightful, Jerry. Which is a nice comment. I brought this question up because I thought this is an important question, I think, for architects firms. How do you convince your clients of, you know, to do a passive house? I'm a certified passive designer. She finds it tough.
Yeah, we actually, I have to say, weirdly, I'm going to flip the question around slightly. We don't force anybody in any direction, really, and in truth. So again, you know, we've done over 20 houses, and we've done 4 certified. But, I mean, basically, every single client there, we try to persuade to do a passive house.
But also, I mean, from your perspective, I'm assuming the deck is stacked slightly, because people come to you probably because they know your background, your credentials, and they know what your firm's all about. So they're probably already thinking, you know, they want to be, if not passive, certainly they're probably thinking they want to be as sustainable as possible, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. So even if it's not a passive house, it'll be a very, very sustainable house.
Yeah.
But sustainability is like a multi-layered thing. So passive house is one measure. It's just energy, you know, which I'm really passionate about. Like, I really want it to be low energy, but also, you know, houses should use less water. Houses should have low embodied energy, which is the amount it used to make it, you know, and also connect to landscape. You know, there's lots of things buildings should do other than just energy.
I've got time for 2 more questions. There's a really interesting one here about solar gain. So how do you ensure you're getting solar gain in the winter months and not the summer months? So how do you do that, Jerry?
No, that's a really good question, actually. So that really is when it comes down to careful modelling. So essentially, if I do that, if it's the window, right, the sun is at a certain angle in the summer and it's at a different angle in the winter. So essentially, you can tailor an overhang over a window, which that you can shade a window during the summer months, and then in the winter months, when you know the sun is lower, you know that the sun will strike that window. So actually, if you looked at Kintyre, say, for example, you'll see there's some overhangs in front of the windows, and they're actually very carefully tailored to make sure exactly that you get. So you see that one in the middle there, that's exactly the size, so that you get solar gain in the winter months, but you don't get too much solar gain in the summer months. But it's a really good question, actually. It's really insightful.
And when you're saying solar gain, you're talking about the sun heating the internal house, the areas of the house,
Yeah, so basically, essentially, it's like a greenhouse. Like, all windows work a bit like greenhouses. When the light passes through, a window, the radiant heat goes into the space. Basically, the wave going through the glass changes the wavelength of the light, so that when it goes the other way, then it can't get out. So you've trapped it into the space, which means you've got solar heating, basically. So you're heating up the space. And what you want is you want the sun to be striking the glazing the right amount to get the right amount of solar gain. And that's when it comes down to, you know, making sure that you've got the right kind of shading and ledges to answer that question.
And one more question. This one is about a wind turbine. So I'm interested in installing a small wind turbine to my cell field. Are there any grants available?
Okay, well that's a really good question. So wind turbines, I have to say, fell out of fashion a little bit. Conventional wind turbines, because there is a bit of a noise issue with wind turbines. Now, so my understanding is there is a feed-in tariff for wind turbines. I think the payback's quite long, 10 to 15 years, but there is a feed-in tariff. But I don't think there are capital grants available. But I would, if you're thinking about a wind turbine, I look at a company. I know I'm not supposed to be. I'm sorry about that, but there's a company called Quiet Revolution who do vertical axis wind turbines, and I know they're extremely quiet. My worry, if you're doing wind turbine next to your house, is it may not sound loud during the day, but when you're trying to sleep at night and there's a slight whirring and you can hear it, that'll be a wind turbine, and you'll think, damn it, I wish I had that in. Yeah.
Jerry, thank you. So, I mean, I love talking with you. I learn something new literally every time I talk with you. So it's fantastic. And I'm sure everybody else has. Just quickly, I'm going to put you on the spot. Very quickly. Top tips for anybody out there self-building, wanting to build a passive or sustainable house. 3 top tips or 2 top tips. What should they do?
3 top tips, right? Okay. Well, number 1 is research, understand where you want to get to, and that's about understanding your own attitude towards sustainability. So it's like the passive house question: do you want a passive house, or do you want an energy efficient building? You know, and you're going to be going in and out of the garden all the time, so there's no point, sort of thing. So number 1 is work that out. Number 2 is essentially think about the fabric of the building. So if you're going to spend money, I think it's worth spending money on the fabric of the building before you spend money on kind of complex systems that you're probably going to change in 15 years' time.
Okay, great.
Number 3 is, and I'm going to say this, and I'm really sorry, you know, not necessarily us, but please do go to a good architect. Make sure you like the work the architect does, and you think the architect can deliver you a sustainable building. You know, and you can tell from their website. So,
Derek, thank you very, very much. Evan, also, thank you very much. This has been a great session. We could have talked, I think, for literally hours. Unfortunately, Instagram only let you talk for 1, so, which is why. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. If you've got any questions about any of the topics that we've covered today, just direct message us on our Instagram feed and we will pass them over to Evan and to Jerry and get back to you. Next week, we have got another very exciting stream, one very close to my heart, which is actually about a journey that I'm trying to go on. And the idea is called The House That Pays for Itself. And it's about looking at whether it's possible to build maybe on a plot more than 1 house, sell the others, use those profits to pay for your house so that you live in there for free, almost kind of like turning yourself into a mini developer. And to help me talk through that, I'm going to be talking to Paul Thomas from Thomas and Spears, who are an architects firm, who actually did this. They actually built 3 houses on a plot for them and the partner within the firm. And I'm also going to be talking to Mike Bristow, who is from a crowdfunding company called Crowd Property. And that's fantastic because there's some really interesting ways now available to people to raise funds. So join us next week. Thank you very much. Jerry, again, thank you. Thank you very much. And Evan, if you're there, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you again the same time, same place next week. Thank you all very much.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye. Thank you. Bye, everyone. See you later.